I'm Jenny.
I'm Kelly.
So today we're talking about the Hunger Games, and we will be diving into Enneagram types 1, 8, and 2.
Yes.
So we know that the Enneagram 1 is always seeking to reform the world. So their goal is to find the best, most good versions of themselves.
Right. Strong moral compass, right and wrong.
Yep. And they avoid basically non-truths about themselves. So anything that could be seen as a lie, could be seen as a white lie, anything that just doesn't sound right is going to be something they're going to avoid and fear.
Yeah.
What about 8s?
So 8s we know as the challengers. This type does not want to be controlled by others. They are very independent. They take charge.
Yes.
They are not afraid to speak their minds.
Yes. And they want to control situations. So they desire to control themselves and whatever they are doing, but they do not want to be controlled by other people. So that's kind of the differentiation between 8s and other numbers, is they really want to be self-sufficient and they don't want other people looking over their shoulders.
Right.
Yeah. And they fear.
They fear vulnerability.
Yeah.
It's too raw, too open.
So that's the key when you see an 8 is the vulnerability piece of, not sharing, no feelings, all those fun things. And then 2. So 2s, they want to help.
Yes, they are known as the helpers. They also are fearing not being loved. They want to be appreciated, supportive, likable.
Right. And without going too in depth here before we get started, that's why they run into people pleasing.
Yes.
Because they want to be loved. And so sometimes they get in their own way.
Yes.
Like all types do in their own way. So we're going to go ahead and start with Katniss. The 3 characters we're going over are the main love triangle characters. We kind of did this love triangle thing last episode with Twilight. So this week we're doing Katniss, of course, Peeta, and Gale.
Yeah.
So let's start with Katniss.
Okay. So we kind of debated back and forth on Katniss being either a type 8 or a type 1, which is why we kind of went over what those types are in the beginning, and we're going to kind of discuss how she could be either.
Yeah. And I really thought she was a 1 at first just because, she's definitely the heroine of the story. She is fighting for what is good, fighting for, the morality of why or why not we're even doing the Hunger Games. She's fighting for her community, 12. So we definitely see that fight for the moral compass, as we discussed earlier, in all of those attributes.
Right. However, she could be seen as an 8 because she's very protective of her family.
Yeah.
She takes over after her dad passes away, takes charge of that leadership role, protects her sister, and even takes her place in the Hunger Games.
Yep. Which could also be a 1 thing,
Yes, could be. Yeah.
Yeah, so we see kind of both. The reason why we did decide on 8 is we definitely see her in that fear of losing vulnerability, like we talked about before. So wanting to hold on to feelings in a way that is protecting vulnerability is definitely an 8 space.
Right, as well as her stance being aggressive and feelings repressed goes along with that. Future oriented goes along with that.
Right. So we see all of that in her, especially when we see her like looking to the future, definitely seeing that she's never getting out of the situation, but she's continually trying to advance, trying to move space in the future for something different to happen for herself, for her people. And then of course we see the aggressiveness, especially I think I always think of the scene when she first gets on the coach with Haymitch and Peeta, and her just overall essence is just angry.
Yeah.
And, a 1 also holds anger. Like their passion is anger. So again, going back to 1, it could be 1. But the reason why it's more 8, it's less feelings.
Right.
So even though the anger is there, it's also lacking of the feelings. Whereas a 1 would be more empathetic to what's going on.
Right. And a 1 would see the role for what it is and try to live up to the role, what's expected of me in this
Right.
space. Where the 8, they don't care what anyone expects of them. They're just going to be them.
Right. And Haymitch definitely sees that when he says comments like, well, we're definitely going to need Peeta to win, the gifts from the crowd because you're not doing us
Right.
any favors.
Exactly.
So he sees that aggressiveness in her and tries to use it to their advantage, I think.
Yeah, she has those harsh edges for sure. Her brusque manner of talking. She's just not seen as likable.
Yeah. Which is not common for a love triangle to
Yeah.
have this 8 that they're fighting over, right?
Right.
But she definitely, takes the stand and definitely makes waves because, she ends up winning the Hunger Games, with Peeta.
Yeah. Well, she's in the body gut triad. So she's very instinctual, which I think is one of the reasons she does so well.
Yeah.
Because she just knows this is what I should do in this moment.
For sure.
Yeah.
And we see that in all 3 books or films. Her kind of moving into that instinctual space, trusting her gut.
Right.
Trusting, pretty much above all else. Like, she trusts her gut more than she trusts people for sure.
Yeah, that independence.
Which is an 8 thing, I think, of all the 3 body types. An 8's instinctual way of moving through the world without caring about relationship and not that they don't care, but they appear not to care.
Yeah, they keep their care on the inside, hidden away.
Yes.
Safely.
Unless someone can pull it out, like Peeta.
Yes. So
Nice transition to 2. Yes. So we think Peeta's the helper. He definitely is seen supporting her, of course, but not just her. He is seen supporting in flashbacks his family. If you read the books, he's definitely talking about supporting his family, even though they apparently don't like him.
Yeah, he's committed. He's helpful. He's working in their bakery.
And he gives all support to her, of course, for multiple reasons. There's some objections, some objectives there on his part, but not just her. I mean, he pleases the crowd. Like, he feels the role of the 2, of the helper, of being present and kind of giving them what they want to hear.
Yeah, he comes off very likable. The crowd is moved by him.
Yeah.
And is the only reason they get help is because of his ways that he gets them to like him.
Right. And self-sacrificing. So, of course, this could be other numbers, but in the 2, we really see it in putting themselves last.
Yes.
Which is something that, if we dive deeper into the 2 a little bit later, that's where they need help, is to do things for themselves. But we see Peeta continually sacrificing for her, sacrificing for the other members, really putting himself last.
Right.
And we even kind of see it in a passive aggressive way when he talks about himself, I'm not that important. I already know I'm going to lose. I know I'm not going to make it.
Yeah.
He says the comment about his mom, thinking that, finally somebody from 12 will win. Well, they weren't talking about me, He says that. So he definitely is putting himself down and supporting other people, which we see 2s do.
Right, for sure. Yeah, he's fearing not being loved. He's trying to earn the affections of Katniss by some of the things that he does.
Yes. From the very beginning, he tries to explain to her in his subtle ways how much he cares about her. And she's totally clueless, of course.
Right.
Because she's like, feelings aren't there and I don't understand this. But he approaches her in a very present way, as a 2 would, and talking about colors and, I like orange, the color of the sunset. Or does he say that, or does she say that? She likes orange?
Yeah, I think she likes orange.
She likes orange, but he's very present with her, talking about, the subtle little things all the way up to the most serious things. And even when they're in the games, he's just so with her. Yeah. Which is what a 2 does.
Very supportive, very helpful.
Yeah. And protecting that fear of not being loved. He wants to the very end, show her, and not just her romantically, But in any of the deeper relationships, even with Haymitch, you know, like in the second round when they get cast again, he puts himself forward. So Peeta goes into the games. You know, he's always presently thinking about other people.
Right. And he's also in the present stance, which also puts him as a dutiful earner. So he's seeing this role as there's rules, I'm going to follow the rules, I'm going to fulfill my duty in this position.
Right.
Yeah.
And going back to like the stage, pleasing the crowd, he does that in a very two-way. You know, it's like he knows this is what they want, going back to rules. And his role, like, this is what they want to hear. This is what I'm going to give them.
Yeah, like when he grabs her hand when they're coming in on the chariot, he's like, they will love this. Just do it. And he lifts her hand up and, you know, the crowd just goes wild.
Right.
This is great.
And that's also because he's in the feelings triad.
Exactly.
You know, he understands feelings, whereas she doesn't. She's like, why am I holding your hand? Like at this point,
is awkward.
I don't even like you. I barely know you. Why are we holding hands? And I mean, at that point, she knew him, of course, but he is always drawing on feelings, which is what we know of the two.
Yes.
And he has that 3-wing, which I know wings aren't as important, but he can win over the crowd with the 3-wing.
With the charm.
Yeah, the charm. Okay, moving on to Gail.
So Gail, we think, is also an 8. Very aggressive, very black and white thinker, which makes this love triangle very interesting. We have 2 hard hitters here.
Yeah, 2 8s, which who would have thought, right?
Yeah.
He is definitely, just like Katniss, protecting himself. He is focusing on how can I remain in control.
Right.
And not showing feelings, even when feelings could be represented. He's very sandpaper against them. Like, no, that didn't really happen because X, Y, and Z, and you can't count the kiss that we just had because of this reason. And he's always fighting against his feelings.
Right. Yeah, he's a big picture thinker. He's thinking about the end goal, the future, the freedom, the survival that will get them there.
Right. So in the beginning, we know that they are friends, and I feel like even from the beginning, we feel like their relationship is definitely not for the romantics. Right. You know, like you can feel this is a have to relationship, not a I am so in love with you relationship.
Right. It's more buddy and we like the same things.
Yes. And even though she mentioned someday, like future planning, we are going to go away and there's kids conversation.
Yeah.
It's never in a romantic way. The communication seems very void of feelings because they're both 8s.
Yeah, it's very logistical.
And then we know that he further on joins the military. Right. So he wants to be part of this hard, you know, space where I am making change. I am creating my own future. Right. And the way that I'm going to do this is this way.
Yeah.
And this way is actually the only way.
Yeah. Very 8, very challenger, very reckless and impulsive.
Yes. So going back to Katniss and this love triangle, when she is in 13 now with him, and Peeta is in a mental hospital or wherever he was, still at the Capitol, we see this love triangle unfold. And Gail very much so believes everything is black and white. Right. Like you cannot like both of us at the same time. Yeah. You cannot be on that side. You have to be going at it on this way. Yeah. And again, that very absolutism that 8s have comes through, especially through Gail.
Yeah, for sure.
We see the stance like you were talking about before, definitely future oriented. He's thinking about his family. He's thinking about, you know, he doesn't want what happened to 12 to happen again. Yeah. So there's a lot of pain there that he isn't showing. Right. He's moving on. The facts are here. This is what we're doing. Yeah. And even when she is now, I think, feeling more one-ish in her, like, this is the right thing to do in this moment, we need to help the people. We need to go in and stop Hunger Games. We need to go in and do what is right. He doesn't see it that way. Right. And so I think that's kind of where we see the difference if they are both 8s. And we're not even going to get into subtypes because that's like level 3 or 4 in Enneagram teaching. But I'm for sure thinking they're different subtypes.
Yes.
And so there's a different side of 8 now that is coming out of Katniss when she's faced with these moral dilemmas.
Right.
And Gail is traditional 8, like this is the only way.
Yeah.
And if you're not coming with me, well, the love thing went away really fast.
Yeah, his priorities are for the cause, for the end game here.
So forget about like us planning a future together because that's not going to help me survive right now.
Yeah.
So that just goes by the wayside, which again, I think is easier for 8s to do because they don't address their feelings.
Yeah.
And she is either welcoming feelings through growth, which would happen if you went through Hunger Games, or she's, a 1, like we talked about earlier.
Right.
So because this podcast is all about self-care, let's talk about what would have happened if these 3 characters were given the proper self-care.
Yeah. So what do 8s need? Well, 8s need to slow down. They need to get in touch with feelings is the main mishap.
Right. And communicate, like having a buddy. I know we've talked about this before, but 8s really they still need to feel heard.
Yeah.
But not heard in the way they believe they need to be heard. They need to be heard in the vulnerable spaces.
Right. They need to feel safe with someone, opening up to someone on those deep spaces that's uncomfortable. But once they find that safe person, they're really going to grow.
Yes. What I heard about 8s the other day by the godmother, Suzanne Stabile, who we love.
Yes.
She said that 8s only trust 10 people in their life.
Wow.
So if you know an 8 and you care about this 8, you want to stay on that number. You want to stay on that page. And so if we are close to Gail, as Katniss is, I think the self-care there would be anytime he is vulnerable, which there were spaces where he was. I mean, especially when he got whipped to death almost.
Yeah.
And she stayed with him. That was great self-care.
Right. Yeah, sitting with in those hard moments. For sure.
She put everything aside, which again, that part showed me like more 1. She put everything aside, knowing the right space to be, even though at that point, I think she did love Peeta.
Yeah.
But she stayed near Gail because that was the right thing to do.
Yeah.
And sat with him in his most vulnerable space.
Yeah. Which that will earn you the 8's loyalty and respect the rest of your life.
And of course, Gail interpreted that as love, which it wasn't.
Yeah.
It was the right thing to do. And that's why Katniss was doing it. So,
yes.
Self-care, more self-care for 8. Again, like you were saying, being grounded. We talk about journaling a lot.
Yeah, journaling is great for 8s. Writing down feelings, keeping track of what feelings are happening, what intensity is going on in me, and what is that linked to. They experience anger most of the time, but it's usually linked to something else that's underlying.
Right, because anger is secondary.
Right.
So we know that when anger comes up, it is a secondary emotion linked to something deeper. Yeah. And to get 8s to talk about that is like pulling teeth. We understand, but when they do, be present, earn that space. And then if you are an 8, journal, get grounded, do something active like you were saying. A lot of times 8s need something like yoga. Or even stretching, something that is less go, and more connected to feelings.
Yeah. Also getting rid of some of that energy is good as well. So doing a challenging sport can be a good practice for once a week, like a rock climb or, some Taibo.
I mean, they have Taibo. That's so funny. That brings me back to like 2001 or something. Right. Yes, let's go. Totally. Something energetic. Well, we know that 8s have the most energy than any other number.
Yeah.
And that energy, if not flushed out, is going to fuel under. And it's going to come out sometime.
Yeah.
And we do not want it to come out in conversation with another person.
or in physicality with
Right.
another person.
Right. Both are bad. So let's flush that out with exercise and journaling. And even, I know 8s especially do not want to journal. So even if it's just writing one word down.
Yeah.
You know, like...
You can bullet point.
Yeah, bullet point a couple things that are on your mind. I know I'm having a hard day. Or you could just put hard day.
Right.
And that alone could get you to a deeper place. You know,
Yeah,
it's baby steps.
Yeah, great.
So with both of these people, Katniss and Gale, who we've typed as 8, I think they would need all of those things.
Yeah.
And if they would have done that, maybe in the 3rd book and 3rd and 4th film, we wouldn't have seen that relationship just kind of blow up.
Right.
I mean, when Gale basically does whatever he wants to do and decides to do the military thing in his own way, and Katniss is fighting for the freedom of the people, so going at it very differently. I mean, they're still friends, but it's never going to be the same.
Yeah.
And so if they could have had a conversation about feelings and she could have been honest, they could have, you know, bridged that and then gotten to the other side of that, of the anger and everything that was built up.
That's what we wish for all 8s.
Yeah. Okay, so Peeta, the 2 in this
Peeta needs some
trifecta.
self-care.
What do we think?
So even though Peeta is in the heart triad and he's aware of feelings, he's not necessarily aware of his own feelings.
Yeah.
That's what happens with 2s. They see your feelings and your needs, but not their own.
Right. And it takes work.
Yeah.
That's why we do the self-care. The self-care is the work. It's like a cheater way to get to your best place.
Yeah, exactly.
So, I mean, that's why we're such a big proponent of self-care.
Yeah.
It's the best way to get there. It's the fastest way to get there without doing a ton of counseling and coaching.
Right.
It really does help. So if Peeta would have done his self-care, what would that have looked like and where would that have gotten him?
Yeah, so Peeta needs to understand that he has needs and feelings too, instead of just pleasing others.
Yes.
It begins by really watching yourself. And so he needs to observe and see, oh, okay, this is something I actually need and want, and I need to do it for myself.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, so throughout the books, we see him, like we said before, sacrificing a lot. And if he would have focused a little bit more on himself, he would have been able to come at the relationship in a stronger way.
Right.
And I think Katniss would have respected him earlier.
Yeah, instead of needing her, he could come at it with, I'm okay on my own as an independent person who's whole.
Yes.
And I love you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And even though she still needed him, she still needed his 2-ness and his feelings, she would have respected him more if he was a healthier 2 that understood that he needs to be cared for as well.
Yeah.
Another thing 2s can do is ask questions.
Yeah.
They can ask, is this mine to do? You know, like Suzanne Stabile always says, is this mine to do? It's such a good question for 2s because they get in their own way all the time.
Yeah, they're always doing everyone else's things, and they're just in the way.
Yes, they're in the way. They think they're helping and they're not.
Yeah.
And, I mean, we see Peeta get captured, right?
Yeah.
And that may or may not have been his fault, right? But he could have, throughout the film and throughout the book series, been asking, is this mine to do?
Yeah.
You know, and I think he still could have earned her affection, even more so, because 8s respect that challenge. 8s respect people who are confident in and of themselves.
Right, for sure.
And I know we're not going to go deeply into this, but because we're talking about 2s and 8s, 2s and 8s go to each other.
Right, they share lines.
So
real interesting.
We can touch on this since it's just the 2 numbers, but 8s go to 2 in health.
Yeah.
And 2s go to 8 in disintegration.
Yeah.
And we teach that you can access both numbers, which for a 2 would be 4 and 8, and for an 8 would be 2 and 5. So we teach that you can access the low and the high, but traditionally, when you're really trying to know your number, it's easier just to focus on one in health and one in stress, just because
Right.
you're naturally going there, especially when you first are learning and working on yourself.
Right.
So in this film, Katniss and Gale would have both been going to 2 when they're good and healthy.
Right.
Which we see that.
Yeah.
We see
We
Katniss
see them
finally,
helping.
oh, you're helping now. Good. It's not all
Yeah.
about you.
Right. She's seeking out to help others.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And 2, I think we talked about 3 before, but Peeta could have even been going to his 4 in health when he was on stage.
Right.
In the chariot, very much performing like 4s are really good at doing.
Yeah. Super in touch with their inner selves and their inner feelings.
Definitely. So we see that identity with Peeta, especially when he's in strength.
Yeah.
Being very confident in who he is and setting himself apart from the other characters in that way.
Yeah. And going to stress for him would be 8. So that would be if he ever lashes out or is a little too bold here and there.
Like when he chokes Katniss to death. Almost.
There you
She
go.
doesn't die, but we see his 8 come out. I mean, it could have been the drugs. But for conversation's sake, for this episode, that was his 8, right?
Yeah.
I mean, he was put in a very stressful situation. He was given, you know, I forget what they're called now, but the things that kind of make you see things.
And the hallucinations.
Yeah, the hallucinations that he was having from those.
The stings.
Yeah, I forget what they're called. We should know this. Anyway,
Yeah.
he was having those hallucinations, so he didn't know what was true.
Yeah.
You know, he didn't know what was real, and he didn't know who he could trust, which would be really hard for someone in the feelings triad.
Yeah.
It'd be really hard for a 1. But with his 2-ness, he is trying to trust, but he doesn't know who to trust. So he's lashing out at everybody. I'm sure he lashed out at the nurses and the people in the Capitol.
Right.
He's lashing out at Katniss, and he was also brainwashed to believe that she was the enemy.
Yeah.
But anyway, we see that not only then, but we see it later coming out too in lashing out at himself.
Yeah.
And again, not trusting her and allowing this space between them where he needed now proof that she really was who she was, you know. And that's more 8 because it's black and white, it's aggressive, it's coming into a space that is very defensive, you know. 8s have that defensive mechanism where anything that you say that goes against what they know, they're going to get defensive about. So all of that is seen on both ends.
Right. It's a really interesting love triangle.
Yeah. 2s and 8s and kind of 1s.
Possibly 1.
Possibly a 1. If you have any thoughts on these 3 characters or 1, 8, and 2, we would love to hear from you. You can always send us messages through the show notes. You can always contact us online at enneaSisters.com. If you like what you're hearing, please follow us. We have an Instagram page. We're also on YouTube. So if you're listening to this podcast, we're also recording this. So it is live on our YouTube page at EnneaSisters.
Yeah. Thanks for listening.
Yes, thanks for listening, and hopefully you'll come back for the next show.